There are 270 miles between Los Angeles and Las Vegas, and almost all of them are Interstate 15. You have probably driven it. On an average week, more than 200,000 Southern Californians make this exact trip, and nearly 2/3 of them go on a Friday or a weekend. Most of them are not thinking about the road at all. They are thinking about a check-in time. The car is loaded, the tank is full, and the drive is the boring part before the interesting part starts. 189 of those miles run through San Bernardino County, and that stretch of Interstate 15 is the deadliest road in America, not the deadliest in California. In the country, 2 separate teams have gone into the federal government's Fatality Analysis Reporting System, the database of every fatal crash on every road in the United States, and come back with the same answer. One looked at 3 years and found 80 fatal crashes on it, more than any other road in the nation. The other looked at 5 years across. 96,000 roads and found 196. Both put it first, ahead of every freeway in Los Angeles, every artery through Chicago, every interstate, through every city in the country. Now here is the part that almost everyone gets wrong. You will be told that it is the desert that does it. The emptiness, the straight line, the heat shimmer, the 100 miles of nothing that lulls a driver to sleep at 80 miles an hour. It is a good story, and there is truth in it. And it is not where most of the bodies are. California's single deadliest stretch of road runs between exit 138 and exit 129 in Hesperia. 19 people died in 4.5 miles in 3 years. That is not the desert. The desert has not started yet. That is the mountains, the pass you climb in the first 40 minutes, while you are still fresh, still sober, still 15 miles from the first Joshua tree. The road does not kill you in one place for one reason. It kills you in a dozen places for a dozen different reasons, and each one is specific, and each one has a name on the exit sign. So that is what we are going to do. We are going to spend the rest of this drive on the road itself, because the crashes are only what happens on top of it. Underneath the pavement, there is a pipeline that has already burned a neighborhood to the ground. Beside it, there is a mine that spilled radioactive water into the valley below for 14 years. There is a solar plant that set birds on fire in midair. There is a fake town built by a man who was not a doctor on land he did not own. There is a Joshua tree forest that burned in 2 days and will not come back in your lifetime. There is an airliner in the side of a mountain with 22 people still accounted for, and one of them the most famous woman in America. There is a ghost town, a closed prison, a dry lake, a stolen river, and a casino with Bonnie and Clyde's car in the lobby. None of that is off the highway. All of it is within sight of it, or under it, or was put there because the highway was there. So we are going to drive it. North in order from the bottom of the Cajon Pass to the crest above Las Vegas, and we are going to stop at every name on the signs and find out what is under it. Start the car. You are at the bottom of the pass, and the road ahead of you goes up. The first thing the road does is climb. You leave San Bernardino at about 1,000 feet above sea level, and in roughly 15 miles, you are at 4,200. The freeway does this by threading a gap between 2 mountain ranges, the San Gabriels on your left, the San Bernardinos on your right. And that gap is not a coincidence of geology. It is the San Andreas Fault. The fault runs directly through the Cajon Pass, and it has spent millions of years grinding the rock between those 2 ranges into something soft enough for water to carve. The pass exists because the ground here is broken. That is the only reason there is a road, and so everything uses it. There is no other way through. Interstate 15 goes up the Cajon Pass. 4 railroad tracks go up the Cajon Pass. A high-pressure petroleum pipeline runs the length of it, buried a few feet down beside the rails. High-voltage transmission lines cross overhead. Route 66 came through here first, and before that, the Arrowhead Trail, and before that, the Wagon Road. Every version of the route from Los Angeles to the interior has gone through this same broken gap in the mountains, because there has never been an alternative, which means that when something goes wrong in the Cajon Pass, it does not go wrong in isolation. Everything is stacked on top of everything else. On the morning of May 12, 1989, a Southern Pacific freight train came over the summit and started down. It was 6 locomotives and 69 hopper cars loaded with trona, a mineral used to make soda ash. The trona had been mined at Owens Lake, 200 miles north, and trucked to a rail facility at Rosamond to be loaded. It was going to the port of Los Angeles, and from there onto a ship bound for Colombia. The paperwork said the train weighed 6,151 tons. The train weighed 8,900. Here is how that happened, and it is worth sitting through, because nobody in this story was careless. Lake Minerals, the mining company, had shipped trona by rail exactly once before, and that time the cars had come in light. 88 tons a car against a contract that called for 100. And they had ended up at the port with a half-empty ship and a bill for freight they had not used. So for the second shipment, they were careful. They had the loading contractor install a sensing device on the front-end loader to measure what was going into each car. They tested it against a truck scale. They checked it again halfway through. The superintendent later testified that they were very concerned with being as accurate as possible. They filled the cars, and then they handed the bill of lading to the clerk with the loaded weight left blank, because they assumed the railroad would understand that a 100-ton car contracted at 100 tons contained 100 tons. The clerk filled it in himself. He had never handled trona. He looked at it, thought about what 100 tons of coal looks like in a hopper car, and wrote down 60 tons a car. So, the crew that boarded that train in Mojave, engineer Frank Holland, conductor Everett Crown, brakeman Alan Reese, 50 years of experience between them, were handed a piece of paper that understated their train by 2,700 tons, nearly a third. They also had a lead locomotive that was dead and would not start, and at the back of the train, on the helper units, one of the dynamic brakes did not work, and the engineer running the helpers knew that, and the crew at the front did not. 3 of the 6 locomotives could brake. The paperwork said the train was light. The road ahead went down. They crested the grade at a normal speed, which is the entire tragedy. The NTSB later re-ran the whole descent with the true numbers and concluded that if the train had come over the top at under 15 miles an hour, the crew might have held it. But 15 is not a speed you choose for a light train. 15 is a speed you choose if you already know. They came over at the speed the paperwork told them was safe, and by the time they understood what they had underneath them, the mechanical brakes were the only thing left, and they were not enough, and the train began to accelerate down the Cajon Pass with 5 men on it, and no way to stop. The brakes stayed on all the way down. Investigators found that the wheels had been melting. At 7:36 in the morning, the train hit a 4-degree curve just north of the Highland Avenue overpass. The curve was rated for 35 miles an hour. The train entered it at 110. It left the track and went into Duffy Street. 7 houses on the near side were destroyed outright, 4 more badly damaged. The entire train, every locomotive, all 69 cars, was wrecked. 680 feet of track was torn out of the ground. Trona went everywhere. The photographs from that morning look like it snowed. Of the 5 crewmen, the 2 at the front were killed. Of the 8 people who were home in those houses at 7:36 on a Saturday morning, 2 were killed. They were children, 7 and 9 years old. 4 dead. The NTSB, when it finished, did not blame the crew. It said the derailment was inevitable. That is the accident. Now here is the second one. Buried 6 feet down, running along the same right-of-way, was a 14-inch high-pressure petroleum pipeline operated by CalNev. It carried 2.5 million gallons a day of gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel out of the Los Angeles refineries. It went to Las Vegas, it fueled McCarran, and it fueled Nellis Air Force Base. Everything that flew into or out of that city ran on what moved through that pipe, which meant Calnev needed it back on. They inspected it after the wreck. They inspected short segments, the places where the locomotives had actually landed on top of it. They did not excavate the full length of the derailment site. They did not run a hydrostatic test. Either one would have found the problem. They found no damage, declared it sound, and repressurized it to full. Then the cleanup of the Trona began. Stakes had been driven along the pipeline's route so the crews would know where it was. Pipeline officials had stood on site as safety observers while the rail cars were removed, but not while the spilled cargo was cleaned up. A backhoe worked the pile above the pipe, and it cut the pipe, and nobody saw it. The gashes did not leak. They just weakened. 13 days later, May 25, 1989, 8:05 in the morning, moments after witnesses heard a train pass over the repaired track, the pipeline let go at the exact point of the curve where the derailment had happened. Gasoline came out under full pressure and fell on the neighborhood, and then it found something to ignite on. The fire threw flames 300 feet in the air. The hydrants failed. Firefighters could not put it out and eventually stopped trying because the only safe way to end it was to let the fuel in the line burn off, and that took nearly 7 hours. When it was over, 2 more people were dead. 11 more houses were gone, along with 21 cars. 5 of the destroyed houses stood directly across the street from houses the train had destroyed 13 days earlier, and one of them was the single house on the track side of Duffy Street that the train had somehow missed. 6 dead. 18 houses. $14.3 million on one block in 13 days. The people who lived there got $5,000 each, negotiated by the mayor to spare everyone a trial. Some of them were on public assistance, and the $5,000 was counted as income, and their aid was cut off. A lawyer showed up on Duffy Street before the fire was fully out, promised them more, collected a settlement, and disappeared. The lots closest to the tracks were rezoned as open space so that nothing could ever be built on them again. Most of the block simply sat empty for the next quarter century. One resident, asked about the pipeline, said that serving Las Vegas was worth more than everything in their town. The pipeline is still there. Calnev reburied 600 feet of it in a bed of sifted sand and encased it in concrete slurry at twice the required depth and turned it back on. And it has been pumping fuel up the Cajon Pass to Las Vegas ever since. It is running underneath you right now as you climb, and the pass was not done. At 10:36 on the morning of August 16, 2016, a fire started on the Blue Cut hiking trail in the San Bernardino National Forest, just west of the freeway. It was 5 acres. There was a red flag warning out. Near 100 degrees, gusts to 30. In under 6 hours, it was 5,500 acres. It ran the pass. It closed the interstate in both directions, which meant that for a day the only road between Southern California and Las Vegas simply did not exist. 82,000 people were told to leave their homes. By the time it was contained on August 23rd, it had burned 37,020 acres and destroyed 105 houses and 213 other buildings. And it was, at that moment, the 20th most destructive wildfire in the history of the state. Among the things it took was the Summit Inn. The Summit Inn was a diner at the top of the pass, on the old Route 66 alignment, at the crest, the place where, for 60-odd years, people who had just ground their way up out of the basin stopped for pie before starting across the desert. It had opened in 1952. On the evening of the 16th, its staff posted that the evacuation had forced them to close for the night, and that they would reopen when it lifted. 4 hours later, the building was gone. Its employees found out watching a news helicopter. So that is the Cajon Pass, a gap that exists because the ground is broken, carrying every road, every rail line, and the fuel supply of an entire city through the same 15 miles, where a clerk's estimate of what coal looks like killed 4 people, and a backhoe killed 2 more, and a 5-acre brush fire took the top of the mountain in an afternoon. You are at the summit now. The mountains fall away behind you. Ahead is the high desert, and it is flat, and it is straight, and it looks like nothing at all. The mountains let go of you all at once. 1 minute the freeway is walled in on both sides, and then the walls end, and the land just opens. Flat and pale and enormous, running north until it stops being a landscape and starts being a color. This is the Victor Valley. You are still 3,000 feet up. The desert down on the floor of the Mojave is another hour away, and it is a different world entirely. This one is high and dry and windy, and it is where most people driving this road first relax. They should not. You are in it right now. Between exit 138 and exit 129, on the stretch of I-15 running down into Hesperia, 19 people were killed in 3 years, 4.5 miles. That is the deadliest piece of road in the state of California. Deadlier than any stretch of freeway in Los Angeles, deadlier than anything in the desert ahead of you. And it is right here, in the mountains, at the top of the pass, where the road is wide and modern, and there is a Del Taco visible from the shoulder. The reasons are dull, which is the point. The grade is steep. The pass funnels wind through a gap, and the wind hits vehicles side on. In winter, it fogs, and the fog sits in the pass in a way it does not sit anywhere else on this road. And it is full, not of tourists, but of people going to work. That last part is the whole story of this valley, and it is worth understanding before we go any further north, because it explains why the deadliest miles in California are also the most ordinary. Nobody comes to Victorville. Victorville is where you end up. Housing in Los Angeles goes up, and people who cannot afford Los Angeles do not stop wanting a house, so they move outward until the price meets the money, and in this part of California, outward means up. Up the Cajon Pass, over the top, into the high desert, where land was cheap because it was 3,000 feet up in the wind, and nothing was there. Whole subdivisions went in. Victorville, Hesperia, Apple Valley, Adelanto, sold to people whose jobs were still down in the basin. They bought the house. They kept the job. So every morning, in the dark, tens of thousands of people get in their cars at the top of the pass and drive down it. 2 hours, sometimes more, and every evening they drive back up. 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, on the deadliest 4.5 miles in the state, in the wind, in the fog, tired going down and exhausted coming back. The vacationers cross this stretch twice a year and remember it as the boring part. The people who live here cross it 500 times a year, and a person who has driven the same 4.5 miles 500 times has stopped seeing them, which is a thing the road knows how to use. That is the first thing you should understand about Victorville. Here is the second. In April of 1940, civic leaders from Victorville went to the United States Army with a pitch. They had a proposal for an airfield, and they had a sales angle, and the angle was that there was nothing here. 360 days of sun a year, open space in every direction, 2 small towns nearby that could supply it. Nowhere for a training accident to land on anybody. The Army bought it. Ground broke in July of 1941, and it was called the Victorville Army Airfield. It taught men to fly. Bombardiers first, then glider pilots. And those glider pilots practiced their landings out on the El Mirage dry lake bed. 7 runways scraped into the dirt and oiled to hold them down, which worked fine until the lake bed flooded in January of 1943, because a dry lake is only dry most of the time. That is a lesson this road teaches over and over, and we are going to see it again. The men who trained here flew gliders into Normandy on D-Day. After the war, the flying stopped, and the field became a parking lot. B-29s came in and sat out in the high desert, hundreds of them, because the air here is so dry that steel does not rust. Remember that. It comes back. Then Korea started, and they turned it back on, and in 1950 they renamed it after Harold George, an Army Air Forces general who had died 8 years earlier in an aircraft accident in Australia. George Air Force Base trained fighter pilots for the next 4 decades. American, NATO, and Allied, through the entire Cold War. It was where the wild weasels came from, the crews whose job was to fly at enemy radar until it locked onto them so they could find it and kill it. It was, for 40 years, the pride of this valley. It grew to 5,347 acres and had its own hospital, its own schools, a hotel, hundreds of houses. In 1988, a commission put it on a list. In December of 1992, it closed. 6,000 people lost their jobs. A fence went up around the perimeter, and that was the end of it. Except that 2 years before it closed, the Environmental Protection Agency had already put George Air Force Base on the Superfund list. Not after, before. By 1990, the federal government had assessed the ground under this base and classified it as among the most contaminated land in the United States. 40 years of teaching men to fly fighter jets does something to the dirt underneath. Aircraft maintenance meant solvents, trichloroethylene, tetrachloroethylene, poured out for 4 decades. Fueling meant jet fuel in the soil. Firefighting training meant they set jet fuel on fire on purpose, over and over, on the same patch of ground, and then put it out with foam that turned out to contain PFAS. Metal plating left chromium and lead. The landfills took PCBs, pesticides, and radiological waste. The Air Force started cleaning in 1981, 11 years before the base even closed, which tells you they knew. They have now spent more than $113 million on it. There are 33 separate hazardous waste problems on the property. There are multiple plumes of contaminated groundwater underneath, and some of them do not stay under the base. And in one of them, floating on top of the water table, is more than 2 million gallons of jet fuel. Not spilled, not spreading. Sitting there as free product in the aquifer. They have been skimming it off since 1992 with passive equipment, the way you would skim a pot. It is still there. Women who lived on that base reported miscarriages. They reported birth defects. Lawsuits have been filed and lawsuits have failed. Nothing residential will ever be built on it. That is not an opinion, it is zoning. The city of Victorville's own long-range plan says no housing on former base property, and the EPA calls the mechanism an institutional control, which is a phrase that means the ground cannot be fixed, so the people have to be kept off it instead. So, the base is still there. All of it. Hundreds of houses, the hospital, the schools, the barracks, the hotel, standing empty in the wind for over 30 years, filling with graffiti and tumbleweeds. They cannot develop it because it is poisoned, and they cannot demolish it because of the asbestos. So it just sits. Soldiers from Fort Irwin use the streets to practice urban warfare. Police train in the houses. If you are on the north end of Victorville and you hear automatic weapons coming out of an abandoned subdivision, that is what it is. And the runways are working. 4,000 acres of the base got handed to the Southern California Logistics Airport. There are aviation companies on it now, and a community college teaching kids to be aircraft mechanics, and a power plant, and a 900-acre federal prison complex. Because when a town loses 6,000 jobs, someone eventually offers it a prison. But the main runway is 15,050 feet long, which means it can take anything that flies. And the air out here is still as dry as it was in 1940, which means steel still does not rust. So the airlines send their dead here. That is what the Victorville Boneyard is. Retired jets, hibernating jets. Jets nobody has a route for anymore. Flown in from all over the world and parked in rows on the concrete of a poisoned Air Force base. Engines wrapped in mylar, waiting for an economy that wants them again or a scrapper who does not. In 2020, when the world stopped flying, the runways filled up. Southwest, Delta, Qantas. Hundreds of them, nose to tail, in the exact same dirt where B-29s were parked in 1946. Victorville sold the Army on this place because it was empty. 85 years later, the emptiness is the only asset it has left, and it is renting it back out as a graveyard. Get back on the freeway. The road drops another 1,000 feet over the next 20 miles, the Joshua trees start, and the next town is the one everybody thinks is the halfway point. It is not. Everyone thinks Barstow is halfway. It sits there at the right moment psychologically. You have been driving about 2 hours, the mountains are well behind you, there are motels and a McDonald's and a mall, and it feels like the natural place to say, okay, we're halfway. People stop here, stretch, use the bathroom, decide they are fine on gas, and get back on the road. You are not halfway. Los Angeles is 115 miles behind you. Las Vegas is 155 miles ahead. You are at about 40%, and every service you have relied on for the last 2 hours is about to stop being available. Barstow is the last real town. What people read as the midpoint is actually the last exit before the part that requires planning. But that is not the interesting thing about Barstow. The interesting thing about Barstow is the reason it is here at all, and the reason is a river you cannot see. The Mojave River runs directly underneath this freeway. It has been under you since Hesperia. You drove over it in Victorville without knowing, and you are near it right now. And if you got out of the car and walked to the channel, you would find a wide bed of dry sand with maybe some cottonwoods in it, and nothing that looks remotely like water. It is there. It is just underneath. The Mojave River has a nickname among the people who study it, the Upside Down and Backwards River. And it earns both halves. Upside down because the water travels underground through sand with the visible channel dry most of the year. Backwards because it flows north, it comes out of the San Bernardino Mountains, and instead of running to the Pacific, 60 miles away, it turns its back on the ocean and goes inland into the desert to die. And the reason it does that is the fault. The same San Andreas system you drove through in the Cajon Pass, the tectonic collision that has been shoving the Pacific Plate under the North American one, is what raised the transverse ranges. Those mountains went up across the path of streams that had been running west to the sea, and the uplift tipped the whole drainage the other way. The water lost its route to the ocean and was handed a northern slope instead. So it took it. The fault that broke the rock to make the pass you just drove through is the same fault that turned the river around. This road and this river were made by the same event, and they have been running alongside each other ever since, because everything that has ever crossed this desert has followed the water. That is not a metaphor. That is the literal history of this route. For something like 8,000 years, the Vanume lived along this river, a desert branch of the Serrano, in villages strung from Barstow up toward Victorville. The Mojave people had a trail that ran from their villages on the Colorado River, west across the desert to Soda Lake, and then followed the river's course to the Cajon Pass. It was a trade route, and it worked because the water was findable along the whole length of it. In 1726, a Spanish priest named Francisco Garces came through and named it Arroyo de los Mártires, Creek of the Martyrs. Later Spaniards called it Rio de las Ánimas, River of Souls. In 1826, Jedediah Smith became the first American to reach California overland. He did it by following the Mojave Trail along this river, and he gave it the name that has outlasted all the others. He called it the Inconstant River. He was being descriptive rather than poetic. The thing is there, and then it is not there. You dig and you get water, and then you go a mile and dig and get sand. It is a river that keeps its promises unpredictably, and if you are crossing a desert on a horse, that is the most important fact in the world. Then in 1829, Antonio Armijo brought the old Spanish trail through, joining the river at its mouth near Soda Lake and following it to the mountains. In 1859, the Army improved the Mojave Trail into a wagon road. Then the railroad came, and it followed the river. Then Route 66 came, and it followed the railroad. Then Interstate 15 came, and it followed Route 66. Every single version of this route, foot trail, pack train, wagon road, rail line, mother road, interstate, is the same line, and that line is the Mojave River. You are not driving on a highway that happens to cross a desert. You are driving on a footpath that follows groundwater paved over 5 times. The river surfaces in only a few places where the bedrock comes up and forces it into the open. There is a spot near Victorville called the Upper Narrows. There is another below Barstow called the Lower Narrows. And there is Afton Canyon, 37 miles northeast of here, which we will get to, and which is the one place on this road where you can actually watch the Mojave River be a river. Everywhere else it is a rumor. At the far end, it fans out into something called the Mojave River Wash and sinks. In an ordinary year, that is where it ends. It just soaks away into the sand short of Soda Lake, 60 miles ahead of you, and never gets there. But not always. In the wet winter of 2004 and 2005, the Mojave River came up out of the ground and flowed on the surface all the way to Soda Lake, and then past it and reached Silver Lake beyond, and filled both of those dry lakes with several feet of standing water. Two lake beds that people drive across, briefly, were lakes again. In 1993, an El Niño put the river over the bridges in Victorville. The worst of it was on Bear Valley Road, where the water came up over an overpass on a river that is not supposed to exist. And 18,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, this river fed real lakes, Lake Mannix, Lake Mojave, big inland bodies of water sitting where the freeway now is. Lake Mannix filled to capacity and breached, and the water that came out carved Afton Canyon. One theory is that it took thousands of years. The other is that a seismic event opened the wall, and the lake emptied in a matter of days. Now, hold all of that alongside what is happening to it today. The Mojave River delivers about 50,000 acre-feet of water a year, almost all of it snowmelt off the San Bernardino Mountains. That is what the desert makes on its own. It is not enough. So the state of California pumps water up over the mountains from the California Aqueduct, as much as 85,000 acre-feet a year, more than the river itself produces, and injects it into the ground at recharge stations strung along the river's course from Hesperia down to Daggett. The natural river is now the minority partner in its own aquifer, and even that has not been enough to stop people fighting over it. In 1990, the city of Barstow sued. Barstow is downstream. It claimed the upstream users in the Victor Valley, the subdivisions, the people who drove till they qualified, the towns you just passed, were pulling so much groundwater that there was not enough left down here. The lawsuit pulled in everyone who touched the basin. It took more than 18 months of negotiation, and it ended in 1996 with a court dividing up an invisible river by decree. So Barstow, the town that exists because it sits on the only water between the mountains and the Colorado, went to court against the towns upstream over how much of a river that nobody can see each of them is allowed to take. Hold on to that. Because 150 miles north of here, on a different road in a different desert, Los Angeles did the same thing to Owens Lake and did not bother with the lawsuit. And we will come back to Owens Lake because the mineral on that runaway train in the Cajon Pass was mined there. Fill up in Barstow. Not because I am telling you to, because from here the exits stop being towns. The next one is a place called Zzyzx, and there is nothing at the end of it. 6 miles past Barstow, there is an exit called Ghost Town Road, and if you take it and drive north, you arrive at a silver town from the 1880s, sitting up against a wall of mountains that are genuinely, absurdly multicolored. Reds and greens and yellows stacked in bands, which is where the name came from. Calico. It looks like the patchwork on a bolt of cloth. There are false front stores, and a schoolhouse, and a saloon, and a narrow-gauge train, and a shop where you can pan for gold. Almost none of it is real, and the reason it is not real is the road you just got off. Start with what actually happened here, because that part is not in doubt. On April 6, 1881, prospectors found silver in those mountains and filed on the Silver King. Within a year, there was a commercial street on a narrow mesa between Wall Street Canyon and Odessa Canyon, flanked by tents and adobe. In October of 1882, the town got a weekly paper, the Calico print. Then it went vertical. By 1884, the state mineralogist reported that 70% of all the silver produced in California came out of San Bernardino County, and nearly 80% of that came out of the Calico district. One town in the Mojave was producing better than half the silver in the state. It got a sheriff, a courthouse, and its own judicial district, because San Bernardino was too far away to be any use. It had a schoolhouse, a post office, a church, a dance school, a literary society, a cemetery, a Chinatown, a red light district, and somewhere between 22 and 24 saloons that never closed. It had telephone and telegraph service. Over 500 mines went into those hills. The Silver King, the Oriental, the Bismarck, the Waterloo, the Maggie. How many people lived here depends on who you ask, and nobody can settle it. The county's own accounts say 1,200 at the peak in 1887. Other histories say 2,500. The number you see on most signs is 3,500. That spread is not sloppiness. It is what a boomtown is, a place where nobody stays long enough to be counted twice. Over about 30 years, the district pulled roughly $86 million of silver and $45 million of borax out of that hillside. It did not survive. The silver market broke in the 1890s. The price went from $1.31 an ounce down to 63 cents. And 500 mines that worked at $1.31 do not work at 63. The miners packed their mules and left. Borax held it together for a while. There was borax at Borate, 3 miles east. And then in 1907, the borax ended too. And that was the end of Calico. The narrow-gauge railroad was pulled up just after the turn of the century. Some of the buildings were physically hauled into Barstow and reused. Around 1917, somebody put up a cyanide plant to rework the tailings from the Silver King dumps and squeeze out what the 1880s had missed, and the town flickered back for a few years. And then that failed too. By 1935, there was nobody here at all. Now, Walter Knott. Knott worked in Calico as a young man. He was a carpenter here. And his uncle, John King, had been one of the founding partners of the Silver King mine, the strike that started the whole thing. The town was family. Knott went on to build a berry farm in Buena Park, and then a restaurant, and then, because people kept queuing for the chicken dinners, something to keep them entertained while they waited. His favorite piece of it was a ghost town. He bought buildings out of real ghost towns and hauled them to Buena Park and assembled them into a place that had never existed, to show life as it was lived in the early days. That is Knott's Berry Farm. The fake ghost town came first. Then, in 1951, he bought the real one. He purchased the entire town site of Calico from the Zenda Mining Company and put roughly $700,000 into it. He had a plan, and he was explicit about the plan. Calico's history, he thought, might work as a tourist draw between Barstow and Las Vegas. That is the whole thesis of this video, stated in 1951 by a man selling boysenberry jam. He hired his own art director from the amusement park, Paul van Kleben, to run the reconstruction. They worked from period photographs and from the memories of people who had actually lived here. And they rebuilt it. The storefronts, the schoolhouse, the whole street. 5 buildings in Calico are original. Everything else you are looking at is a reproduction of a photograph. Historians have a phrase for what Knott did here, and it is very good. They call it de-ghosting a ghost town. And then there is the bottle house. Knott had seen a house in Rhyolite, Nevada, a real ghost town, 100 and some miles north of here, built out of bottles, because in a boomtown lumber is expensive and saloons come early, so glass is the cheapest building material available. He photographed it. He liked it. So in 1953 he built one in Calico, 5,419 bottles. Butt ends out, necks protruding on the inside, the word Calico across the top, and a zigzag of green glass along the foundation. There is no evidence Calico ever had a bottle house. Knott knew that. His position, recorded plainly, was that bottle houses had existed in mining towns, so it was not inappropriate to build one here. It is now a shop that sells supplies for dogs. In 1962, the state made Calico Historical Landmark number 782. In November of 1966, Knott gave the whole 480 acres to San Bernardino County, and it has been a county regional park ever since. In 2005, the governor of California proclaimed it California's Silver Rush Ghost Town. So, a town that produced half the silver in California died in 1907. 44 years later, the nephew of one of the men who founded its richest mine bought the corpse and rebuilt it out of photographs, as a reproduction of a place that a reproduction at his theme park had already been imitating, and added a house from a different ghost town in a different state that Calico never had, and it is now an officially proclaimed state landmark that 250,000 people a year pull off Interstate 15 to visit. Everything on this road is selling you the desert. 60 miles ahead, a man with no medical degree will sell you a hot spring that is a diesel boiler. 70 miles ahead, a restaurant owner will sell you a temperature that may never have happened. Calico is the strangest one, because Calico is true. It really was here. It really did all of that. And it is still a replica. Back on the freeway, the exits thin out. In about 30 miles, the ground opens up on your right, and the river you cannot see comes up out of the sand for the only time on this drive. 37 miles northeast of Barstow, between the Afton Road and Basin Road exits, the Mojave River comes up out of the ground. This is the only stretch of this entire drive where you could go and look at it. There are exactly 3 places in the whole desert where that river runs on the surface year-round, and this is the good one. You leave the freeway, drive down into a gorge with walls a few hundred feet high, and there is water. Sometimes a trickle, sometimes a couple of feet deep, running east and north between cliffs, with tamarisk and willow along it. They call it the Grand Canyon of the Mojave. It is not, but it is the only canyon most people out here will ever see, and it was cut by a river that does not exist. That is worth being precise about, because the canyon is the evidence. At the end of the last ice age, there was a lake here. Lake Mannix, a real, large body of standing water filling the central Mojave, fed by the Mojave River back when the Mojave River was a river all the time. It sat in that basin for a very long while, and the ground at its eastern lip was soft, coarse sedimentary rock, barely more cemented than dried mud. And then it went. There are 2 theories, and one of them is calm, and one of them is not. The calm one says the water rose until it spilled over the lip and started cutting, and the cutting took hundreds or thousands of years, and the canyon opened gradually as the lake drained into the Soda Lake Basin to the east. The other one says a seismic event breached the wall. If that is what happened, Lake Mannix did not drain. It failed. The whole lake went through that gap and into the basin, a wall of water taking the soft rock with it, and emptied in a matter of days, possibly weeks. That is the geological estimate. This canyon, several hundred feet deep and miles long, may have been carved in less time than a vacation. Either way, it happened about 25,000 years ago, and the hole it left is what you are standing in. The river has been going through it ever since, on its way to Soda Lake, where it sinks, and it is still working. Everything downstream of here, the sand in the Devil's Playground, the sand that piles up into the Kelso Dunes, the most photographed landform in the Mojave National Preserve, is Mojave River sediment. The river carried it down through this canyon and spread it out on the far side, and the wind picked it up and stacked it. The invisible river built the dunes. People have been coming through this gap for as long as there have been people here. It was on the Mojave Indian Trail, the trade route from the Colorado River to the coast. Father Garces came through in 1776 and called the surrounding rock Sierra Pinta, Painted Mountain. Jedediah Smith passed through in 1826 on the trip where he named the river Inconstant. Kit Carson came through. So did John C. Fremont. It was not called Afton then. It was called Cave Canyon, or just the caves, because 3 caves had been eroded into the walls, and wagon trains heading east out of Camp Katy made this their first night stop. 16 miles out, water available, shelter in the rock. Then the railroad came. The San Pedro, Los Angeles, and Salt Lake line was built through here in the early 20th century, because of course it was. This is a gap through the mountains with water in it, and every route across this desert has followed the water since the trail. It is now Union Pacific Track, and it is one of only a handful of rail connections into Southern California. An enormous amount of what is in your house came through this canyon on a train. Building it destroyed 2 of the 3 caves. And then they renamed the canyon Afton, after a railroad stop at the head of it. So the place lost its name because the railroad erased the thing it was named for and got a new name from the railroad that did it. There was a mine 400 feet up the cliff, the Arbuckle, working magnesite until about 1918 with an aerial tramway that carried ore down the rock face and across the Mojave River to a siding. There was a town at the mouth of the canyon called Baxter, a rail siding and mining center which lost its mining and then lost its name too, because another town on the same railroad was already called Baxter. They renamed it Basin. It is a ghost town now, and its exit is still on the freeway, and the river keeps taking the track back. Those enormous, rare, unbelievable floods, the ones where the Mojave stops being a rumor and becomes a river again, the ones that filled Soda and Silver Lake in 2005 and went over the bridges in Victorville in 1993, come down this canyon because this is the only place they can go. In 1938, it flooded ferociously. It has washed out the right-of-way more than once. There is a photograph people who know this canyon all know, a length of railroad track out past the mouth, where the watercourse spreads, twisted like a pretzel. Not broken, twisted, steel rail wrapped around itself by water that is not there 360 days a year. That is the inconstant river keeping its name. You cannot see any of this from Interstate 15. You go over it at 80 miles an hour on a bridge, and the sign says Afton Road, and there is nothing to look at. Back on the freeway. The exits from here are Basin Road, and then Razor, and then Zzyzx, and the river you have been driving alongside since Hesperia is doing the same thing you are, heading northeast towards Soda Lake, underground to die. You will get there first. The sign is real. That is the first thing people need to be told, because a lot of drivers see it at 80 miles an hour and assume it is a joke or a glitch. Zzyzx Road. 1 mile. It is the last word in the American Atlas, alphabetically, and it is there on purpose, and the reason is a man named Curtis Howe Springer. Take the exit. The pavement gives out partway along and turns to dirt, and you drive 4.5 miles south, away from the freeway, toward the edge of Soda Dry Lake. And at the end of it, in the middle of 100 miles of nothing, there are palm trees. There is water here. That is the whole explanation for everything that follows. It was called Soda Springs long before Springer arrived, and it worked the way Barstow worked. It was on the water, so everything came to it. Native people stopped here for it. Spanish explorers found it. In 1860, the U.S. Army put a post here, Camp Soda Springs, and gave men the job of sitting in the Mojave guarding government supplies from people who were thirsty. Miners came for the lake minerals. The Tonopah and Tidewater Railroad ran a station here and then went out of business and left it. By the 1940s, all of that was ruins. An abandoned army camp and a dead railroad stop at a spring at the edge of a dry lake. Curtis Springer found it in a book. He bought a used copy of Mineral Springs of the Pacific Coast at a second-hand bookstore for 25 cents, and there it was. Here is who he was. Springer was born in Birmingham, Alabama, on December 2, 1896, and that is very close to the last verifiable fact about his early life, because he made up the rest of it as needed. He may have been a boxing instructor in the First World War. He may have campaigned against alcohol alongside William Jennings Bryan. He may have worked at a school in Florida and attended a college in Chicago. There is no record of any of it. He claimed an M.D. He claimed a Ph.D. He claimed an N.D. He claimed to be a Methodist minister and the dean of Greer College. Some of his degrees came from institutions that did not exist. One of them was called the Springer School of Humanism, and Springer was the school. He was not a doctor. He was not a minister. He had, as far as anyone has ever been able to establish, no formal education whatsoever. What he had was a voice. Springer went into radio in the 1930s, and he was extraordinary at it. Twice a day, syndicated across the country for decades. A mix of Christian preaching, health lectures, and product. He sold elixirs and cure-alls without being specific about what was in them, and he asked in return only for a small donation to the ministry. His signature promise was that following his advice would leave you internally, externally, and eternally clean. The American Medical Association came for him in 1935. Their journal ran a piece titled Curtis Howe Springer, A Quack and His Nostrums. That is September of 1935, 9 years before Zzyzx existed. Nothing happened. He got a job at another station in Chicago, then moved to Pittsburgh, and his career took off. On September 13, 1944, Springer and Helen, his fiancée, later his wife, filed mining claims on 12,800 acres of federal land around Soda Springs. 8 miles long, 3 miles wide. Under the General Mining Law of 1872, you could stake public land and work it, and if you eventually proved to federal geologists that there was something down there worth extracting, you could patent the claim and own it. Springer never intended to mine anything. He intended to build a resort, and he did. And he did it on land that belonged to the United States government, and he did it for 30 years. He named it Zzyzx. He told the New York Times in 1970, plainly, that he did it because he wanted to have the last word. Last in the alphabet, last in any directory, last word in health. It is not a word, it never was. You will not find it in a dictionary. He started with 20 tents. For labor, he went to Skid Row in Los Angeles and recruited homeless men and brought them out into the desert and gave them food, a bed, dry work, and no alcohol in exchange for building his kingdom. Some of them were probably better off. The National Park Service has said as much. Nobody wrote any of it down. What they built, out of concrete in the Mojave, over 3 decades, a 2-story 60-room hotel called The Castle, rows of cottages he called seacots, a dining hall, a lecture room, a chapel, a library, a pool house, a radio studio to broadcast the sermons from, gardens, a goat shed, rabbit hutches dug underground, a diesel generator plant, a private airstrip he named Zyport, a graded road out to the highway, lined with his own billboards. He ran a fleet of buses that collected guests from the Figueroa Hotel in Los Angeles once a week and drove them out here. And he dug a lake, an artificial one, and he called it Lake Twendai. And he told people that Twendai was a Native American word meaning where the waters come together. It is not a word in any language. He made it up, the same way he made up his medical degrees, because it sounded correct. At its peak, over 100 people slept here a night. He charged on a sliding scale, and he turned nobody away for lack of money. The center of it all was the mineral baths, because the springs were the entire premise. That was the healing. That was the reason to come. The springs at Soda Springs are cold, so Springer installed diesel boilers and heated the water and let people believe they were sitting in natural hot springs in the middle of the Mojave Desert. He ran that for 30 years. There is a hot spring under this place, and it is a boiler, and it is buried in the sand. He sold 27 different cures over his lifetime. Antediluvian tea, which was bark and herbs, and which one honest description calls a laxative in a tea bag. Z's foot crystals for poor tired feet, $15 for 40 ounces, which is about $140 in today's money. Nerve cell food. He claimed his products would fix everything from sore toes to cancer. Mostly, they were over-the-counter chemicals, mud and minerals scraped off the dry lake out back. It held for 23 years before anyone with authority did anything about it. What finally broke it was not the medicine, and it was not the boiler. It was greed at the end. Springer started dividing the tract into parcels and offering them to his biggest donors, selling pieces of the United States to people who trusted him. In 1967, the Bureau of Land Management sued him for $34,187 in back rent and damages. In 1968, the California Department of Public Health arrested him on 65 counts of false advertising. He pled guilty to 8. In 1969, the American Medical Association, 34 years after the first article, formally named him the King of Quacks. In 1970, he was convicted of false advertising over nerve cell food, fined, and sentenced to 60 days. He appealed for years. He eventually served 49, and he fought the land case the whole time on a straight face with an argument that is almost admirable. His claim, he said, never specified gold. He was harvesting salt crystals off the lake for his health products. Those were economic minerals. He was mining. The government's finding was that Springer did almost everything but mine. On April 11, 1974, Judge Francis C. Whelan ordered him off. 30 years of building, and the court gave him 36 hours to take what he could carry. He was 77 years old. He offered to write the government a check for the full $34,000 in back rent. They refused the money and evicted him anyway. Federal marshals cleared out Zzyzx. Springer and Helen moved to Las Vegas, at the other end of this road, and he never got the place back. And he died there on August 19, 1985, at 88. He is buried in the National Cemetery at Riverside, which is a thing he had no right to either. In 1976, the BLM handed the site to a consortium of 7 California universities. It is now the CSU Desert Studies Center. Students and researchers live in his cottages and work in his buildings and study the desert he lied about for 30 years. It sits inside the Mojave National Preserve now, all 1.6 million acres of it. The public can walk one trail. The trail goes around Lake Twendai, because there is a fish called the Mojave Tweechub. It is native to the Mojave River, the invisible one, the inconstant one, the one that ends right here at Soda Lake. It has been pushed out of essentially its entire range, and it is endangered. Springer stocked his fake lake with them, for decoration, on a whim, sometime in the middle of the con. They are still there. Lake Twendai, the artificial pond with the invented Indian name, dug by a man with no degree, next to a hot spring that was a diesel boiler, is now one of the last places on Earth where that fish exists. It is a protected habitat. The Park Service manages it. The only true thing Curtis Springer ever made, he made by accident. Back on the freeway. 6 miles ahead there is a town, and the town has a thermometer, and the thermometer is 134 feet tall for a reason. You can see it from a long way out. There is nothing tall in this part of the Mojave. The land is flat and the air is dry and clear, and 134 feet of steel, standing straight up out of the desert floor, is visible from miles away in 3 directions. That is the point. It was always the point. This is Baker. A few hundred people live here. There is no reason for Baker to exist except that it is the last thing before there is nothing, and Baker knows it and has built its entire identity on that one fact. Highway 127 leaves here and runs north to Death Valley, which is why the signs call this the gateway to Death Valley. But mostly, Baker's business is you. The last gas, the last food, the last bathroom before the long climb. And in 1991, a man here decided that was not enough of a hook and built the tallest thermometer in the world. His name was Willis Herron. Herron grew up in Corbin, Kentucky, in the same small town at the same time that Harlan Sanders was working out how to fry chicken and turn it into an empire. Some of the colonel's instincts came off on him. The road food, the showmanship, the understanding that a highway is a river, and you have to give people a reason to pull out of the current. Herron moved to the California desert and opened a restaurant called Bun Boy. In 1990, Bun Boy burned down. He rebuilt it. And next to it, he put up something that would make a person driving 80 miles an hour on Interstate 15 take their foot off the gas. He hired the Young Electric Sign Company out of Salt Lake City, the people who build the signs in Las Vegas. And he spent $750,000. Not on the restaurant, on a thermometer. It is 134 feet tall. It weighs 76,812 pounds. It is held down by 125 cubic yards of concrete. It displays the current temperature in electric bulbs and its maximum reading, the top of the scale, the highest number it is physically capable of showing, is 134 degrees. Both numbers are the same number on purpose. On July 10, 1913, at 3:30 in the afternoon, a weather station at Furnace Creek in Death Valley, about 70 miles north of where you are sitting, recorded an air temperature of 134 degrees Fahrenheit. It is the highest air temperature ever officially measured on the surface of the Earth. It has stood for over a century. Heron built a monument to it and made the monument exactly as tall as the number. Now here is the thing about that number. A lot of meteorologists do not believe it. There has been serious, credentialed argument that the 1913 reading is not physically possible given what was happening in the weather that week, that something was wrong with the observer or the equipment, or both. The World Meteorological Organization has considered the objections and still recognizes it. It remains the official record. So the tallest thermometer on Earth stands 76,000 pounds of steel tall, in the exact proportion of a measurement that may never have happened. 6 miles behind you, a man with no medical degree heated a cold spring with a diesel boiler and sold it as a natural miracle for 30 years. Here in Baker, a restaurant owner built a monument to a temperature that might be a typo. Both of them were selling the same product, which is the desert's reputation, and both of them were right that people would pay for it. They finished the thermometer in 1991. Before it was ever officially lit, a 70-mile-an-hour wind came through and snapped it in half. It fell on the gift shop and crushed it. It had been designed to flex. It flexed. They rebuilt it to be rigid instead, and it went back up, and it was finished in October of 1992, and it has stood ever since. The hottest it has ever read was 127 degrees in August of 1995. Willis Heron built it just tall enough. He also eventually sold it. The thermometer went in 2000, and then it changed hands again, and the man who ended up with it also owned the Bob's Big Boy in town and a few other properties, and then the recession came. And 134 feet of electric sign costs about $8,000 a month to keep lit. So he turned it off. It stayed off for about 3 years. The bulbs failed in patches, so the temperature it displayed was nonsense, random digits burning in the sun. The gift shop emptied out and filled with graffiti. Businesses in Baker said their sales dropped because the only reason anyone stopped in Baker was the thing that was now dark. The general manager of the local water district called it an embarrassment. There was talk of tearing it down. There was talk of scraping the words "world's tallest thermometer" off the town water tower, because they were no longer true and everyone could see it. The owner told a radio station on the record, "If someone would like to help me with the electric bill, I have no problem with that." It was listed for $1,750,000. Willis Heron's widow was named Barbara. She used to come out and look at it. At her husband's thermometer, dead, with tourists still pulling off the freeway to photograph a broken sign. And she said that if she ever got it back, she would fix it. It took a foreclosure and an order from a federal judge, but in March of 2014, she got it back. She paid for the repairs out of her own savings, about $150,000. She and Yesko called the job the Big Fix. New computer, new wiring. The old incandescents came out, and LEDs went in, so it would never cost $8,000 a month again. Fresh paint, a picnic area at the base, a gift shop called Temp 124. They relit it on July 10th, 2014, at 3:30 in the afternoon. That is the 101st anniversary of the world's hottest day, to the day and to the minute. It came on reading 102 degrees, which in Baker in July is a mild afternoon. It is still there. It is lit right now, above you as you pass. Inside the gift shop there is an oil portrait of Willis and Barbara on the wall, and the original circuit board from 1991 in a display case, and fridge magnets stamped with the hottest temperature of the previous year, and bulbs from the original thermometer mounted individually on wooden bases like relics. Out back there are 2 fake eggs in a cast iron skillet with a thermometer of their own, so you can check whether it is hot enough yet. They also sell snow globes. Fill up here. This is the real one. Not because the desert is coming. You have been in the desert for an hour. But because from Baker the road starts climbing again. And between here and the state line there is a long grade with nothing on it. And the exits stop having towns attached to them. The next 50 miles are the part that Baker has been warning you about. At 134 feet since 1991, there is 134 feet of steel behind you telling you what the danger is. It is wrong. Not about the desert. The desert is exactly as hot as advertised, and out on Highway 127, north of here, in Death Valley, heat kills people every year in the ordinary way, and they die of it. But this is not Death Valley. This is Interstate 15, and it is the deadliest road in America, and the thing that kills people on it is other cars. That is the whole answer. It is boring, and it is unromantic, and it is why the number is 1,000 and not a dozen. Nobody on the deadliest road in the country dies of the desert. They die because a 2-ton object came toward them at a closing speed of 160 miles an hour. Here is what that actually looks like on this stretch. On June 29, 2025, at 22 minutes past 4 in the morning, a 70-year-old man from Temecula was driving a 1999 Honda Accord North in the southbound lanes. He had gotten onto the freeway the wrong way, and he was in the number 1 lane, the fast lane, going against traffic in the dark. Coming the other way in that same lane, going the right direction, was a 33-year-old woman from Henderson, Nevada, in a 2023 Kia Niro. She had a man in the passenger seat. She was headed home. They hit head-on, just north of the Zzyzx Road exit. Both drivers were pronounced dead at the scene. The passenger was cut out, put on a Mercy Air helicopter, and flown to University Medical Center in Las Vegas, which is the city they had been driving to. The California Highway Patrol's finding was that alcohol and drugs are not believed to have been a factor. That is the part that should stay with you. Nobody was drunk. Nobody was high. A 70-year-old man got on the freeway in the wrong direction at 4 in the morning in the middle of the Mojave, and 80 seconds of ordinary confusion killed 2 people who had never met. And it was not unusual. On the evening of November 17, 2025, at 8:01 p.m., 911 started taking calls near Barstow, a small dark sedan going southbound in the northbound lanes. Callers put it in the fast lane at about 70. It went past Lenwood Road. It went past Kane Street. It did not slow down. Highway patrol units set up traffic brakes, physically slowing every car on the freeway to open a gap. And at 8:08 they found the car stopped in the center divider. 7 minutes. Nobody died. 2 wrong-way drivers on the same stretch of road inside 5 months. One of them was a statistic, and one of them was a phone call, and the only difference was what happened to be in the fast lane. The rest is just as plain. March 29, 2025, 22 minutes past 3 in the morning, southbound at the Baker Boulevard exit. The one you just passed. A small pickup with a camper shell rolled and landed back on its wheels. 1 person dead at the scene. July 3, 2026, southbound near Barstow. A 65-year-old man from Phelan on a 2002 Suzuki moved from the number 3 lane to the number 2, found it occupied, steered right, and clipped the left rear of a tractor trailer. He was thrown off, came to rest in the number 2 lane of an interstate, and died at the hospital. July 6, 2026, 3 days later, at the Ghost Town Road off-ramp, the exit for Calico, where the false front stores are. A single vehicle rolled. Fatal head injuries. 1 person. None of those involve the desert. Every one of them is a person and a machine and a lane change. And that is the thing this road does that the Cajon Pass does not. And it is worth naming plainly before you start the climb to Halloran. At the top of the pass, 150 miles back, the danger is legible. There is fog. There is a grade. There is wind through a gap. There are trucks. There is a curve rated 35. The road tells you. Out here, it tells you nothing. It is 4 lanes, dead straight, perfectly maintained, 60 miles between towns, with nothing on either side and nothing in the mirror. There is no fog. There is no grade worth naming. There is no reason to hold the wheel with both hands, so people do not. The empty part is not more dangerous than the pass. The federal numbers are clear about that. The worst 4.5 miles in California are in Hesperia, in the mountains, where the road looks like a threat. What the empty part does is remove every cue you have. A man drove north in the southbound fast lane for however long it took at 4 in the morning, and there were no other headlights to tell him, and no shoulder markings he was reading, and nothing to be wrong about until there was a Kia in front of him. The desert does not kill you out here. It just makes it very easy to make one mistake and gives you nothing to catch it with. Halloran Summit is ahead, 3,000 feet of climb, and off to the right there is a hill with a dead forest on it. Out of Baker, the road starts going up, and it does not stop for a long time. Baker sits at about 900 feet. Halloran Summit is at 4,000. The freeway spends the next 20-odd miles climbing 3,000 feet at a grade shallow enough that you will not particularly notice it. No switchbacks, no walls, just a long tilted plane of asphalt running up into higher country. Your car notices. On a 115-degree afternoon, this grade is where cooling systems that were fine in Barstow stop being fine, where a tire that was a little old and a little low finds out, where the temperature gauge that has never moved in your life starts to move. There is nothing out here. The exits have names, but the names are not towns. Halloran Springs, Halloran Summit, Cima Road. Take that last one seriously for a moment, because there is something out there, off to the right, that most people driving this road have never heard of and would not look at twice. About 10 miles south of the freeway, there is a hill. That is genuinely all it looks like. A low, wide, symmetrical swell in the desert floor, 10 miles across, so gently curved that from the ground you often cannot tell you are on it. It is called Cima Dome, and it is a bulge of granite pushed up through the Earth's crust, and it is close to perfectly round. On a topographic map, it shows up as a set of near concentric rings, which is a thing landscapes almost never do. Joshua trees live between about 2,500 and 6,000 feet. That is a narrow band, and the Mojave is broken country. The land that sits at the right altitude is chopped up by mountains that are too high and valleys that are too deep, so Joshua trees mostly grow in patches, clinging to whatever fragment of correct elevation they can find. Cima Dome, by accident of geology, sits entirely inside that band. All 10 miles of it. Miles of continuous, uninterrupted, exactly right habitat, which is a thing that exists almost nowhere else. So the trees took it. A 2018 survey counted about 80 Joshua trees per acre out there. It was known as the largest and densest Joshua tree forest in the world, and people who spent time in it did not talk about it the way you talk about scenery. One man who camped there for over 20 years wrote that it was the center of his world. Here is the part that matters. That forest should not have existed. Cattle came into this country in the late 1800s and grazed it for 100 years, and the preserve scientists have 2 photographs taken from the same spot, one from the early 1900s and one from the year 2000. In the first one, there are no Joshua trees. In the second one, there are many. What the cows did was eat selectively. They ate the grass. They did not eat blackbrush. a scrubby, resinous, highly flammable shrub. So blackbrush thrived. And blackbrush turns out to be exactly what a Joshua tree seedling needs: a nurse plant, a bit of shade and shelter to survive its first decades before it can stand on its own. So the cattle cleared the competition, spared the nursery, and kept the fine fuels chewed down to nothing so that fire could not carry. 100 years of that on a 10-mile granite dome sitting in the perfect altitude band, and you get the densest Joshua tree forest on Earth. It was not natural. It was a side effect. As one of the preserve's scientists put it, what everyone had been calling the world's largest Joshua tree forest probably did not exist in the early part of the 20th century. In 1994, the California Desert Protection Act created the Mojave National Preserve, and by 2002, the grazing permits were retired. The cattle came off. This was, by every conventional measure, a conservation victory, protecting one of the great wonders of the American desert. And with the cows gone, nothing ate the grass. Invasive red brome came in and filled the ground between the trees. Fine, dry, continuous fuel, growing uninterrupted year after year, between 80 Joshua trees an acre and 100 years of accumulated blackbrush. A scientist at the preserve described the result in 5 words. It was just waiting for a spark. Someone had said so, out loud, decades earlier. In the 1970s, a rancher named Carole Lombard, arguing for his grazing permit, so read him with that in mind, wrote that proper grazing definitely lessens the chances of disastrous fires that could destroy such areas as the Cima Dome Joshua Forest. He was making a self-interested argument. He was also right. On August 15, 2020, at 3:51 in the afternoon, the summer monsoon reached the East Mojave. The thunderstorm brought no rain. It brought dry lightning, and it struck near Deer Springs, on the dome. It was the first day of what California would come to call the lightning siege, the opening of the largest wildfire season in the state's recorded history. Everything was burning. When the Mojave National Preserve requested help, the requests were denied. There was nothing to send. A national park's worth of Joshua trees, and no one was coming. The fire took 20,000 acres in just over 24 hours. It moved tree to tree. Joshua trees are not adapted to fire. They have no bark, no defense, nothing. They simply burn. And it crossed park roads and it crossed fire lines, and the winds inside it organized into rotating columns of flame. Furinados. It went over Cima Dome and Teutonia Peak and ran on into the Ivanpah Mountains. In 4 days it was over. 43,273 acres. 68 square miles. It killed 6 structures, an adobe bunkhouse at Valley View Ranch, a ranch house at Kessler Springs. And no people. No firefighters hurt. Small animal mortality came in under 20%. They surveyed for desert tortoise afterward and found no direct mortality at all. The best estimate was perhaps a dozen animals and 1.3 million Joshua trees. Of the 1.33 million that burned, fewer than 200,000 still had any green on them afterward, which is to say fewer than 200,000 had any chance at all. About a quarter of the forest, and it was the best quarter. Most of them are still standing. That is the thing people are not prepared for. They did not fall down. They are out there right now, black, upright, with their leaves scorched pale, and in the evening light they are beautiful, and they are dead. A USGS ecologist who had studied the forest said that stand had been developing for thousands of years and that we won't replace it. The preserve's own botanist was blunter. Cima Dome, he said, was a model for where the Joshua tree could persist for the next 100 years. It was a beautiful, lush, decadent Joshua tree forest. But they're wiped out. That word, model, is doing specific work, and it is the worst fact in this segment. In 2011, researchers built predictive models of where Joshua trees could survive as the climate warms. The species is in trouble. It grows 40 feet tall and lives about 150 years, and it cannot move. Its seeds are big and heavy and were once carried around by giant ground sloths, and the ground sloths have been extinct for 11,000 years. So the seeds now fall where they fall. The tree migrates at a walking pace of a few feet per generation, and the climate is moving faster than that. The models identified refugia, the specific places where Joshua trees might still be able to hang on a century from now. Cima Dome was one of them. The perimeter of the dome fire overlaps the modeled refuge almost exactly. The fire burned the place the species was supposed to retreat to. They are trying to put it back. Park staff started a replanting project. A few thousand seedlings into the burn scar, watered by hand, caged against animals, planted by volunteers who named them. In the first 2 years, they put in about 1,900 trees. 80% of them died. One of them was named Bratislava. A volunteer named it on the 6th of November. It is dead. And even if the seedlings lived, the arithmetic does not work, because a Joshua tree is pollinated by exactly one thing: a single species of yucca moth, which lays its eggs in the flower and carries the pollen and cannot survive without the tree, which cannot reproduce without the moth. The moths are gone from 68 square miles. Whether they will still be around in 50 or 60 years, when a seedling planted today first blooms, is not a question anyone can answer. The botanist's summary of the restoration effort was that it'll never come back like it was. Not with climate change. So, 100 years of cattle accidentally built the greatest Joshua tree forest on Earth. The government protected it by taking the cattle away. 18 years later, the fuel that grew in their absence carried a lightning strike across the whole thing in 4 days, while every firefighter in California was somewhere else, and it burned the one place the species was supposed to be able to survive the next century. Nobody did anything wrong. That is the part worth sitting with as you climb. Halloran Summit is ahead. Over the top, the road drops toward the state line, and on the way down there is a mine on your left that spilled radioactive water into the valley below for 14 years. 15 miles short of the Nevada line, the freeway goes over one more summit, and on the west side of the road, there is a hole in the ground about 1,500 feet across and 400 feet deep, with a small industrial plant beside it. You have driven past it a dozen times. It has no exit worth taking and no sign worth reading. For 30 years, essentially every color television on Earth was red because of that hole. In 1936, there was gold mining here, which came to nothing. Then in 1949, a prospector came through looking for uranium, carrying a Geiger counter, and the needle went up. He had not found uranium. He had found bastnasite, an ore carrying rare earth elements, which are not actually rare but are miserable to separate, and which happen to sit in the periodic table right next to things that are radioactive. Thorium and radium occur naturally throughout that ore. That is why the counter clicked. Remember that. The mine was discovered because the ground is hot. It is the first fact in this story, and it is also the last one. The Molybdenum Corporation of America bought up the claims and started small in 1952. Then came color TV. Color television needs a red phosphor, and the best red phosphor anyone had was europium. Europium is a rare earth. It was in that rock. Demand went vertical in the 1960s, and Mountain Pass went with it. From 1965 to 1995, this mine supplied most of the world's rare earth consumption. Until the early 80s, it was 70% of global supply, and for 30 years, it was very nearly the only source of europium on the planet. Every color set in every living room in every country. The red in it came out of the Mojave Desert, 15 miles from the Nevada state line, off Interstate 15. The company shortened its name to Molycorp in 1974. Union Oil bought it in 1977. And it had a waste problem. Concentrating rare earths out of the rock is chemistry, and the chemistry produces wastewater. A lot of it, toxic and extremely salty. So in 1980, Molycorp buried a pipeline 14 miles long, running from the mine northeast to Ivanpah Dry Lake, where it discharged into evaporation ponds on and around the lakebed and let the desert take care of the rest. California regulators approved that. They approved it on the basis of what Molycorp told them, which was that the pipeline carried uncontaminated salty water. The pipeline crossed several washes. It crossed National Park Service land. It ran alongside critical desert tortoise habitat on ground managed by the BLM. Now here is the mechanism, and it is very simple, and it is the entire disaster. Mineral-heavy water flowing through a pipe leaves deposits on the inside. That buildup is called scale, and scale has to be cleaned out or the pipe closes up. So periodically Molycorp would scrub the line. The scale was radioactive. It was radioactive because the ore is radioactive, because thorium and radium occur naturally in it, which is the exact reason a man with a Geiger counter found this place in 1949. And the pipe kept breaking during the cleanings. Not once. A federal investigation eventually counted about 60 separate spills between 1984 and 1998. 14 years. Some of them were never reported at all. In total, roughly 600,000 gallons of radioactive and otherwise hazardous wastewater went onto the open desert floor. One accounting puts the lifetime figure at over 1 million. For 15 years, the state of California believed it was salt water. What finally ended it was a rupture in 1996 during a routine scrubbing, a big one, big enough that it could not be quietly cleaned up, big enough to start an investigation. And the investigation asked the question nobody had asked since 1980, which was, what is actually in this pipe? The answer was heavy metals and radioactive material, possibly uranium, manganese, strontium, cerium, barium. It had been going into the ground for 15 years. The San Bernardino County District Attorney sued Molycorp civilly for violating California's drinking water laws. Federal criminal investigations opened. UNOCAL's own SEC filings in 1998 mention, in the flat language of a quarterly report, the suspension of settlement discussions of criminal investigations arising from wastewater pipeline incidents at Molycorp's Mountain Pass facility. The cleanup ran past $3.5 million. Molycorp was fined another $410,000 for failing to report the spills on time, or at all. Total fines and settlements came to over $1.5 million. And then they shut the pipeline. Permanently. Which killed the mine. Not the fines, the plumbing. Once the pipe was closed, there was no way to get rid of the wastewater, and the legal and financial obstacles to building a new disposal system turned out to be insurmountable. In 1998, Molycorp suspended chemical processing. The separation plant stopped making refined rare earth compounds. The mine limped on shipping raw concentrate until 2002, and then it closed. While all of this was happening, China had been building. By 2005, 96% of the world's rare earth elements came out of China. Not most. 96. The United States had gone from owning the global supply to owning 4% of it in about a decade, and the thing that pushed it over was a pipe that kept cracking open in the Mojave. In 2007, China restricted rare earth exports and imposed tariffs, and the American defense and technology industries discovered all at once what they had given away. Rare earths are in every magnet, in every electric motor, every wind turbine, every guided munition, every phone. So they came back for it. UNOCAL got a new 30-year permit in 2004 after a cleanup plan and a full environmental study. Chevron took the whole thing over in 2005 and sat on it. In 2008, a newly formed company called Molycorp Minerals bought the mine with the intention of rebuilding an entire American rare earth supply chain in the desert. Mine it, process it, separate it, and eventually make the magnets here, instead of shipping the concentrate to China and buying it back. And they had to solve the waste because the waste is what killed it last time. Their answer was to stop moving water at all, squeeze 85% of it out of the tailings, leave a thick paste, store the paste in lined pits on their own land, and recycle the water back into the plant. No pipeline. Nothing crossing the washes. Nothing going on to Ivanpah. The pit is open again. The mine that America found by accident, lost through negligence, and then needed back for national security reasons is working right now on your left as you come over the top. The pipeline is not. 14 miles of it is still buried out there under the creosote, running northeast, empty. Follow its line with your eyes as you come down the grade, because we are going where it went. Ivanpah Dry Lake is straight ahead, and there is something on it now. You come down off Mountain Pass, and the whole valley opens up in front of you. And out on the floor of it, on the left, are 3 towers with the sun sitting on top of them. They are too bright to look at. That is not a figure of speech. People have complained to the FAA about it, and pilots on approach into Las Vegas can see them from 40 miles out. 3 points of white light on the desert floor, brighter than anything has any business being, hanging above a lake of mirrors. This is the Ivanpah Solar Electric Generating System, and it is standing on Ivanpah Dry Lake, which is where the pipeline went. That is the same lake bed. 14 years of ruptures, 60 spills, 600,000 gallons of thorium and radium, and whatever else was in that water. This floor, right here, is where it was going to evaporate. And the name of it, Ivanpah, comes from the Kemahuevi language. It means clean water. Here is what got built on it. In the late 2000s, the United States was coming out of a financial collapse, and the 2009 stimulus put billions of dollars into clean energy at once. Jobs and carbon reduction in the same instrument. A company called Bright Source Energy had a technology it wanted to prove at scale. NRG Energy put in $300 million. Google put in $168. The Department of Energy guaranteed a loan of $1.6 billion. Bechtel built it on about 6 square miles of federal land for a total of roughly $2.2 billion. It does not work like the panels on a roof. There is no photovoltaic anything here. Ivanpah is a steam plant, the same basic idea as a coal station or a nuclear station. Boil water, spin a turbine. The only difference is, what does the boiling? Around the 3 towers are 173,500 heliostats. Each one carries 2 mirrors. That is roughly 347,000 mirrors, individually computer-controlled, tracking the sun across the sky all day and aiming its reflection at a boiler on top of a 459-foot tower. 347,000 mirrors, all pointed at the same 3 spots. The air in front of those receivers reaches about 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The Department of Energy projected 940,000 megawatt-hours a year, and about 550,000 tons of carbon dioxide avoided annually. Enough for 140,000 homes. The largest solar thermal plant on the planet. It synced to the grid in September of 2013 and formally opened on February 13, 2014. And if you drove this road in 2014, it looked like the future had landed in the Mojave. Now the problems, in order of how much they mattered, which is the opposite of the order everyone remembers them in. The tortoises came first. Before a single mirror went up, the desert tortoise was in the way. The design got cut back about 10% from its original 440 megawatts to stay off tortoise habitat. Construction stopped anyway in the spring of 2011, while the Fish and Wildlife Service worked out whether the project would jeopardize the species. They concluded it would not. Work resumed. BrightSource fenced the wildlife out and relocated the tortoises they found to other parts of the Mojave. And biologists pointed out, correctly, that a relocated desert tortoise is a stressed desert tortoise, and stressed desert tortoises die. The Sierra Club opposed it, a large clean energy project in the middle of the climate fight, opposed by the Sierra Club. Then came the birds. Ivanpah has 3 enormous columns of concentrated light standing over an empty desert. And light attracts insects, and insects attract birds, and the birds fly into the flux. At 1,000 degrees, a bird does not have time to fall. It ignites in flight and keeps going, trailing a thin line of smoke behind it until there is nothing left. The people who work at the plant named it. They call them streamers. During the plant's trial run in September 2013, before it had formally opened, they found 34 dead birds. By 2016, the Los Angeles Times was reporting 6,000 a year from collision or immolation. A 2023 report from the Association of Avian Veterinarians put it at least 6,000 annually. The honest version is less cinematic than the word suggests. A federal survey of bird remains at Ivanpah found 141 carcasses in its sample, 47 attributable to solar flux, 24 to blunt trauma from flying into mirrors they could not see. Plenty of them are simply hitting glass. But the flux deaths are real, and the National Renewable Energy Laboratory has noted that this specific kind of death, burning in the air, has only ever been observed at power tower plants. It is not a solar problem. It is an Ivanpah-shaped problem. And here is the detail that undoes the whole poem. Ivanpah burns natural gas every morning to warm itself up. 347,000 mirrors, and it needs a fossil fuel to get out of bed. 6 miles behind you, a man with no medical degree heated a cold spring with a diesel boiler and called it a natural miracle. Here, the state-of-the-art in clean energy is 3 boilers on towers that need gas to start. But none of that is what killed it. The birds did not kill it. The tortoises did not kill it. The Sierra Club did not kill it. Photovoltaic panels killed it. While Ivanpah was being designed, financed, litigated, and built, ordinary boring solar panels got cheap. Not slightly cheaper, over 90% cheaper since 2014. And then batteries got cheap too, so a plain PV farm could store its power and sell it in the evening when California actually needs it. Ivanpah cannot store anything. Its design boils water directly into steam. There is no thermal storage in it. So it produces at midday, which is the exact hour when California's grid is already drowning in solar and the power is worth almost nothing. Wholesale prices in California fell under 3 cents a kilowatt hour by 2025. Ivanpah's contracts guaranteed it up to 14. And it never even hit its numbers. It has never exceeded about 75% of projected output. Its capacity factor runs under 30%. NRG has written down its stake by hundreds of millions of dollars since 2018. It was obsolete almost the moment it opened, not because it was fake, the engineering works, the thing makes power, but because it lost a race to a technology that got boring and cheap while the concrete was still curing. So in January of 2025, PG&E and the plant's owners agreed to tear up the contracts. Units 1 and 3, 259 megawatts of it, were supposed to run until 2039. Instead, they would go dark in early 2026, 13 years early, and the site would be cleared and maybe rebuilt with the flat panels that beat it. Everybody wrote the obituary. It ran everywhere. The bird-burning monument to good intentions was finally coming down. Then, in December of 2025, the California Public Utilities Commission read the deal and said no. They rejected the termination agreements without prejudice, Resolution E5429, and their reasoning had nothing to do with birds. It was reliability. It was uncertainty about what would get built to replace it. It was the risk of stranding infrastructure that has already been paid for, with a $1.6 billion federal loan still on the books. So Ivanpah is running. It is running right now on your left, out on the lakebed named for clean water, above 14 miles of dead pipeline that spent 14 years leaking radioactive scale onto that same ground. 347,000 mirrors aimed at 3 boilers, burning gas every morning, making midday power nobody needs at a price nobody wants, killing 6,000 birds a year, because the state looked at the cost of switching it off and decided it was cheaper to leave it on. The state line is 4 miles ahead. There is a casino on it with a stolen car in the lobby. The state line is a line on a map, and there is nothing about this particular patch of desert that would otherwise make anyone stop here. That is the entire town. That is all of it. Nevada begins, and everything Nevada allows that California does not begins with it, and so at the exact instant the law changes, there is a cluster of casino towers rising out of the flat. Primm is standing on Ivanpah Dry Lake, the same lake bed. It runs north and south of the town. 14 miles of dead pipe drained onto it, and 347,000 mirrors are standing on it behind you, and the name of it means clean water, and there are hotel towers on it too. Start with Pete. In the 1920s, a man named Pete McIntyre had a gas station right here on the road that would later be designated U.S. Route 91, the two-lane predecessor of the freeway you are on. It did not do well. Selling gasoline at the state line to the handful of people crossing the Mojave in the 20s was not a living, so he started making whiskey. This was prohibition, and he was a man with a remote property, some caves, and a highway going past his door. Local history remembers him as Whiskey Pete. He died in 1933. The legend, and it is a legend told about him rather than by him, is that he asked to be buried standing up. Vertical coffin, upright, with a bottle of his own moonshine in his hands, so that he could go on drinking while he watched over the state line. They buried him somewhere on the property, unmarked, and forgot exactly where. In 1977, Ernest Primm opened the first casino here and named it after him, Whiskey Pete's. 777 rooms eventually, 34,000 square feet of gaming floor, a race and sports book. And years later, when the company was building a bridge to carry people from Whiskey Pete's over Interstate 15 to the newer casino on the other side, the construction crew dug up a grave. It was him. They had accidentally exhumed Whiskey Pete while building an overpass across the freeway for the casino named after him. They moved what they found, and he is now said to be buried in one of the caves where he used to cook the moonshine. He wanted to stand at the state line forever and watch. They put him back in the cave and built the bridge. Ernest Primm came out here in the 1950s with a motel and a coffee shop. That was it. That was the town, and it was called State Line, plainly because that is what it was. He died in 1981. His son Gary built the rest. Whiskey Pete's in 1977, the Prima Donna in 1990, later renamed the Primm Valley Resort. Buffalo Bill's on the 14th of May, 1994, with its two towers named for Buffalo Bill Cody and Annie Oakley, a swimming pool shaped like a buffalo, and a log flume. And in August of 1994, the Desperado. The Desperado was, when it opened, the tallest roller coaster in the world. 209 feet of lift hill, a 225-foot first drop, 80 miles an hour. It was built in the middle of the height wars, when every operator in America was trying to buy a record for a season, and it worked exactly as designed. People flew in from other countries to ride it. They rode it once, maybe twice. Then somebody else built a taller one and they went there instead. In 1996, the town formally renamed itself Primm, partly to honor Ernest and partly because there is already a state line up at Lake Tahoe, and the mail kept getting confused. In 1998, they added a mall, the Fashion Outlets of Las Vegas, 370,000 square feet of retail in the desert, 40 miles short of Las Vegas, betting that people would stop and shop before they got to the thing they had actually driven 4 hours to see. MGM bought the whole town in 1999. In 2004, they put up 52 apartment buildings called the Desert Oasis so the staff would not have to commute from anywhere, because there is nowhere to commute from. In 2007, MGM sold it to Herbst Gaming. In 2009, the Herbst family lost the company in Chapter 11, and it was reorganized into what became Affinity. Then it started closing. The mall was rebranded Prism Outlets in 2020, and by 2023 it was almost entirely empty. It sold in 2021 for $400,000, 370,000 square feet of building, on the interstate for the price of a condo. The tram, a single-car people mover on an elevated track over the freeway, running at 15 miles an hour, carrying 1,200 people an hour when it worked, stopped running around 2016. Nobody has ever given a public reason. It is still up there. Whiskey Pete's closed on December 20th, 2024, Buffalo Bills closed in 2025. The Desperado is standing out there right now, 225 feet of steel over an empty parking lot, and nothing is on it. One casino is left, the Primm Valley Resort. In June of 2026, the Primm family cut a deal with Terrible's, a gas station chain that runs slot routes, to take over operations, and the state approved it later that month. Terrible's belongs to the Herbst family, the same Herbsts who bought this town in 2007 and lost it in bankruptcy in 2009. They are back, buying the operation of the thing they lost from the company that was made out of their own wreckage. The stated plan for Primm is to repurpose the properties to serve as travel resources for motorists driving in from California, which is to say, a gas station at the state line, which is what Pete McIntyre had here in 1920, before it failed and he had to start making whiskey. And through all of it, they have been moving the car. In April of 1934, Clyde Barrow stole a brand new Ford four-door deluxe sedan out of Jesse and Ruth Warren's driveway in Topeka, Kansas. On the 23rd of May, on a road outside Gibbsland, Louisiana, 6 lawmen put something on the order of 160 rounds through it and threw the 2 people inside. The car went back to the Warrens. It got sold. And then it went on the road. Fairs, carnivals, sideshows, the actual object, hauled around America for decades as an attraction. In 1973, a 22-year-old casino owner from Jean, Nevada, the next town north of here, bought it at an auction in Massachusetts for $175,000. That was the highest price ever paid for an antique car in the world at that point. Something like $1.2 million in today's money, paid by a 22-year-old for a car with 160 holes in it. He put it in his casino, and in 2 years, over 100,000 people came to look at it. And then he decided to sell it, and the reported reason is one of the strangest sentences on this entire road. He felt it would be in bad taste to keep it around because they were building a women's prison next door. The Jean Conservation Camp, a minimum security facility for female offenders, was going up on the edge of his town, and the man who had paid a world record price to display the bullet-riddled car in which a famous woman was shot to death decided that with a prison full of women about to open across the street, it was no longer appropriate. In 1988, Gary Primm bought it at auction for $250,000 after the Jean Casino was liquidated. Everything in it, the article notes, from the vehicles down to the floor polisher. It went into Whiskey Pete's that year. A decade later, they added Clyde's shirt, with the holes and the blood still in it. Since then, it has been moved 4 times, and every move is a casino dying. Out of Whiskey Pete's during the pandemic. Into the mall entrance? Into Buffalo Bills in late 2022, when that reopened after 3 years dark. Back out of Buffalo Bills in 2025, when it closed for good. It is now at the Primm Valley Resort, the last one standing, in a glass box beside the saloon, with 2 mannequins of Bonnie and Clyde posed next to it holding guns, and Clyde's shirt, and the front page of the Dallas Morning News announcing their deaths, and J. Edgar Hoover's apprehension orders, and a bank of Bonnie and Clyde slot machines. Next to it sits Dutch Schultz's 1931 Lincoln, bulletproof doors, inch-thick glass, which Al Capone's people used after Schultz was murdered in 1935. It is free. It is open 24 hours. Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow died 1,500 miles from here. They never came to Nevada. There is no reason for that car to be in this building, except that a town built on a line on a map needed something to make you stop, and a dead outlaw's car was for sale. It has been carried from room to room in a house that keeps closing for 38 years. And it is the last exhibit still standing in a town that has lost 2 of its 3 casinos, and its mall, and its tram, and its roller coaster. 12 miles ahead is Jean. That is where the car came from. There is a dry lake there, too, and a prison, and a mountain on the left with an airliner in it. 12 miles north of the state line, the freeway crosses another dry lake, and there is an exit called Jean. This is where the car was. In 1973, a 22-year-old named Peter Simon put the Bonnie and Clyde Ford in his casino here, Pop's Oasis, and 100,000 people came to look at it in 2 years, and then they started building a women's prison on the edge of town, and he decided it was in bad taste and sold it down the road to Primm. The prison got built. The Zzyzx conservation camp, minimum security. The casino is gone. Take the exit anyway and go west on Highway 161, and in 7 miles you are in Goodsprings. 229 people live in Goodsprings. They took lead and silver and copper and zinc and gold out of these hills, and the town boomed twice, once for the First World War and once for the Second, because both wars needed metal, and then both wars ended. The first building you see is the Pioneer Saloon. It has been there since 1913. Inside there is a wall of photographs and newspaper clippings and pieces of an airplane. And there is a story, and we will get to whether it is true. On the morning of January 16, 1942, in Indianapolis, at 4 o'clock, 3 people boarded TWA Flight 3. Carole Lombard was 33 years old and the highest-paid actress in America. Her mother, Elizabeth Peters, was with her. So was Otto Winkler, MGM's press agent and Clark Gable's best friend. Lombard had just finished the first war bond rally held after Pearl Harbor. In a single day in Indiana, she had sold over $2 million in bonds, something north of $30 million in today's money, raised by one woman in one day, 5 weeks after the country entered the war. She had been told to take the train home. Flying was considered the risk, winter weather, and the possibility of sabotage. She told a life photographer that she could not face 3 days on the choo-choo train. So, Flight 3, New York to Burbank, with stops at Newark, Pittsburgh, Columbus, Dayton, Indianapolis, St. Louis, Kansas City, Wichita, Amarillo, and Albuquerque. It ran late out of St. Louis. Fog, quarter-mile visibility, nearly 2 hours lost. And then Albuquerque, which is where it turns. 15 U.S. Army Air Corps personnel needed to get to California, and in January of 1942, military travel outranked everything. There were not enough seats. TWA's answer was to take Lombard's group off the airplane. She refused. The Civil Aeronautics Board later took testimony on this. She argued that her war bond work made her essential too. She cited the $2 million. She threatened to make calls to the people who had put her on the flight in the first place. The station agent did not want the fight, and he gave in, and her party got back on. So other passengers were removed instead. One of them was a violinist named Joseph Szigeti. He lived. That is what the argument at the gate purchased. She won it. 15 soldiers boarded, her group stayed on, and 3 civilians were put off the airplane and went on with their lives. They also changed the crew at Albuquerque. Captain Wayne C. Williams took over. 11 years at TWA, 12,204 hours in the air, more than 3,500 of them in DC-3s. This was not an inexperienced man. Co-pilot Morgan Gillette, air hostess Alice Getz. Now the weight. Between Lombard's luggage and the soldiers' gear, the airplane could not carry enough fuel to reach Burbank. There was a refueling stop planned at Winslow, Arizona. En route, the captain decided to skip Winslow and go to Las Vegas instead. And here, the last piece slides into place, and it is a piece of paper. TWA's terminal in southern Nevada was at Boulder City. That was the normal stop. But Boulder City had no runway lights, and night landings were not allowed there, and it was dark. So they went to the Las Vegas Army Airfield, what is now Nellis, 30 miles away. The flight plan in the cockpit called for an outbound magnetic heading of 218 degrees. 218 is the correct heading to Burbank from Boulder City. From Las Vegas, it should have been 205. The flight plan was normally written by the first officer and signed by the captain. This one was never signed. They took off at 7:07 in the evening. The night was clear and moonless. Williams had been advised to fly 208 degrees and climb to 10,000 feet. He flew 218 and climbed slowly toward 8,000 at about 150 miles an hour. 10 degrees off. On a heading written for an airport he had not departed from. And every lighted airway beacon along that route, the chain of lights on the ground that existed for exactly this purpose, to tell a pilot at night where he was, had been switched off. They were dark because of the war emergency. She was flying home from selling war bonds, and the war had turned off the lights. At 7:20 p.m., 13 minutes after takeoff, Flight 3 flew into a sheer vertical cliff on the side of Potosi Mountain at an elevation of 7,770 feet. The summit of Potosi is 8,517. They were 747 feet from clearing it. The airplane disintegrated and the fuel went up in a column of fire that people saw for a very long way in a very dark desert. All 22 aboard were killed instantly. Lombard, her mother, Otto Winkler, the 3 crew, and 15 soldiers whose names almost nobody has ever learned. The KB's finding, in the flat language of these things, was that the probable cause was the failure of the captain after departure from Las Vegas to follow the proper course by making use of the navigational facilities available to him. Contributing, the blackout of the beacons necessitated by the war. And then the investigators did one more thing, and it is the detail that keeps this from being a story about one bad night. They pulled other TWA flight plan forms for other real flights on that same Albuquerque-Las Vegas run. They found another one with the same wrong number on it. 218 out of Las Vegas. TWA's chief pilot testified that it was obviously a mistake. It was in the system. Williams flew a heading that somebody else had also written down on a different day, on a flight that happened to survive. Clark Gable came. He was at the El Rancho, Las Vegas, and he went up the mountain with the search parties, hard rock miners, soldiers, and a man in his 70s named Tweed Wilson, who knew the country and was brought in to help find a path up. The terrain is some of the worst in the western United States. It took them until the 18th to reach it in the snow. 3 days after the crash, he came out of his bungalow with an MGM vice president on one side and a friend on the other. Now, the Pioneer Saloon. The story the saloon tells, and has told for decades, is that Gable sat at that bar for 3 days waiting for word, and that the burn marks in the wood are from his cigars. Goodsprings is the nearest place to the crash site from which a search could be run. The geography supports it completely. The evidence does not. Contemporary reporting puts Gable in Las Vegas, at the El Rancho, and there is simply nothing establishing that he ever sat in that saloon. It is probably not true. It has been told for 80 years, and there are burn marks in the bar, and people drive out from Las Vegas to look at them. Which puts it in good company. 100 miles behind you is a hot spring that was a diesel boiler. 90 miles behind you is a thermometer honoring a temperature that may never have been recorded. 60 miles behind you is a silver town rebuilt out of photographs with a bottle house it never had, and a bullet-riddled Ford 1,500 miles from where anyone died in it. Goodsprings has burn marks on a bar. Everything on this road is selling you a story, and the stories are almost true, and the almost is the point. The wreckage is still on Potosi. You can get to it. There is a road out of Goodsprings, and then a gate, and then a hike, and pieces of NCU 1946 are still lying against that cliff at 7,770 feet, back on the freeway, 25 miles to go. There is one more rise, and then the valley. 20 miles out, at an exit called Sloan, there is heavy equipment working in the dirt beside the freeway. That is going to be a maintenance building for trains. Hold that for a minute, because it is the last thing on this road and it is the oldest thing on this road, and to see why you have to put the whole 270 miles back together. You started at the bottom of a gap in the mountains that exists because the San Andreas Fault ground the rock to pieces. The same uplift that opened that gap tipped a river backward, so that instead of running 60 miles to the ocean, it turned inland and went north into the desert to die. That river runs underground almost the entire way, and for 8,000 years, everything that has crossed this desert has followed it, because it is the only water there is. The Mojave people had a trail along it, from the Colorado River to the coast. Spanish priests used the trail. Jedediah Smith used the trail in 1826 and named the river Inconstant. Antonio Armijo brought the old Spanish trail down it in 1829. The Army graded it into a wagon road in 1859. The railroad followed the wagon road and blew up 2 of the 3 caves at Afton doing it. Route 66 followed the railroad, the Arrowhead Trail, then the highway, then the Interstate, each one laid on top of the last. 6 versions of the same line. Every one of them the same line because there has never been another way through. There is about to be a seventh. Brightline West is 218 miles of all-electric high-speed rail from Las Vegas to Rancho Cucamonga, and it is being built in the median of Interstate 15, not beside it, in it. The California North segment, 110 miles from the state line to Barstow, the longest piece of the project, is entirely inside the median. The trains will run at over 186 miles an hour down the middle of the road you're on, and they will do the trip in 2 hours and 10 minutes, which is roughly half of what you are doing right now. The federal government put $3 billion into it in December of 2023. They broke ground in Las Vegas on the 22nd of April 2024. Field crews have spent the last 2 years drilling test borings and potholing for utilities from Rancho Cucamonga to Sloan. The tie plant in North Las Vegas is a $20 million facility that exists to make concrete for this one railroad. Revenue service is now scheduled for late 2029, having already slipped from 2027. Caltrans leases them the median. 50 years. $842,000 a year, adjusted for inflation every 3. That is the rent on the middle of the deadliest road in America. Under $1 million a year. Nearly 50 million trips happen in this corridor annually, and more than 85% of them are somebody in a car, doing exactly what you are doing. Now look at where they put the stations. There is the flagship in Las Vegas, at the south end of the Strip. There is Rancho Cucamonga at the other end, elevated over the Metrolink tracks. There is one at Apple Valley, on the platform, in the median, reached by a walkway that runs underneath the northbound lanes of the freeway. And there is one at Hesperia. It is in the median of Interstate 15 at the Joshua Street exit. Trains will make limited stops there, in the morning and in the evening. Morning and evening. That is not a phrase about tourists. Nobody flies to Las Vegas on a Tuesday at 6 a.m. from Hesperia. That station is for the commuters. The people who drove till they qualified, who bought the house at the top of the pass and kept the job down in the basin, who have been going up and down that grade in the dark and the fog and the wind for 30 years. And the platform is standing in the middle of the deadliest 4.5 miles of road in the state of California. Between exit 138 and exit 129. 19 people in 3 years. They are building a train station in it for the exact people who are dying on it, and the train has to get down to Rancho Cucamonga somehow. So the last 34 miles of the line run through the Cajon Pass, hugging the northbound median through the same broken gap, over the same buried pipeline that burned Duffy Street, on the same fault that started all of this. That is the whole road in one sentence. They are laying a 7th route down the exact center of the 6th because the fault only made one hole in the mountains, and there has never been anywhere else to put anything. Out at Sloan, off to the east, there is a canyon with rock art in it. People walked this corridor and stopped in that canyon and cut pictures into the stone, and they were doing it because they were going the same direction you are, along the same water, for the same reason, and they did it long enough ago that nobody can tell you their names. The maintenance facility for the high-speed rail is going in at Sloan. Then the road makes one more rise, and Las Vegas comes up out of the ground in front of you all at once. The whole valley, the towers, the light, sitting on the desert floor at the end of the drive. If it is night, it is the brightest thing for 400 miles in any direction. It is also the only reason for every single thing you have passed since the bottom of the Cajon Pass. The pipeline under Duffy Street was going here. 2 people burned to death on a street in San Bernardino because this city needed jet fuel. And a man who lived there said that serving Las Vegas was worth more than everything in his town, and he was describing the arithmetic accurately. Curtis Springer died here. They evicted him from Zzyzx at 77 and refused his money, and he came to the real oasis at the end of the road, and he is buried at Riverside now. The passenger they cut out of the Kia at Zzyzx Road at 4 in the morning was flown here, to a hospital in this valley, which is where the woman driving had been trying to get. Carole Lombard took off from an airfield that is now the Air Force Base on the other side of this valley and flew into a cliff 13 minutes later, 747 feet from the top. The mirrors are still turning out on Ivanpah, making power the grid does not want because the state decided switching them off would cost more than leaving them on. and 200,000 people a week are on this road right now, most of them on a Friday, doing the same thing, thinking about a check-in time. The road behind you is 189 miles of the deadliest pavement in the United States, and almost none of what killed anyone on it was the desert. It was a clerk who had never seen Trona guessing what 100 tons looks like. It was a backhoe operator who could not see a pipe. It was cattle being taken off a hill to protect a forest. It was a scale cleaning schedule on a 14-mile pipeline. It was a flight plan written for a different airport and never signed. It was a 70-year-old man who got on the freeway going the wrong way, sober, at 4 in the morning, with no lights coming toward him to tell him. Ahead of you, the speed limit drops. The lanes multiply. There is a sign for the strip. Take the exit or do not. The road does not end here. It keeps going north, out the other side of the city, up toward Utah, and it is somebody else's drive from here. You made it. Most people do.